Good evening, everyone. My name's Chris Nitzo. This is an Oz Cyclone Chasers Cyclone video update for the Australian region, issued on the 27th of January 2014. Tonight, folks, we're going to talk exclusively about the upcoming Queensland tropical cyclone, which will be called Tropical Cyclone Dylan, assuming, of course, that it does form. Firstly, I'd like to let you know that our team is in the pre-planning phase, which means that we have now been upgraded from on alert to actually starting to narrow down locations of landfall or possible locations of landfall. We are also starting to do all of those things on that list. So we're checking out our safety gear, making sure that's up to scratch, all our video and weather instruments, making sure they work. We need to narrow down our target zone, not too much, but we need to narrow it down to just a few hundred Ks. We need to look at where we can stay. We need to look at the roads around there, what the chances are of flooding, particularly with the storm surge threat later on in the period. And we need to look at, obviously, model guidance, make sure our houses are left nice and tidy before we leave, and we need to purchase these things before water and fuel before we leave. So once we do all those things, and if things continue to look quite promising for a tropical cyclone crossing, we get into the final planning phase, and that's when we really narrow down the location that we're going to go to, and that phase will probably happen around Wednesday morning for us. Alright, that's enough about our team and what's happening with our team. Let's get into what's happening with the low. Issued earlier is the Tropical Cyclone Formation Probability Guidance from NOAA, and we can see that this region right in here in the northern and central Coral Sea is primed for development of a tropical cyclone. We can also see that the Western Australian region is now no longer suspect for tropical cyclone development, but really this is our region now of focus, and we'll take a look at a little bit more detail at this region now. Looking at the last few hours of satellite imagery right in that area that we just showed you, we can see that we're starting to get some very deep convection developing, particularly to the northeastern edge of that low. So we're seeing some very, very deep and strong convection forming there. You can see that black cloud top right there, suggesting an extremely high cloud top or very cold cloud top temperature. And so therefore we're looking at that becoming quite active overnight. Now look, this is the worst time for convection over water. This is when convection tends to be at its weakest. So the fact that we're getting some very deep convection right now means that we should see the tropical low deepen overnight, especially if it can align itself underneath or close to that deepest area of convection. The other thing we can tell from this satellite image is that we do have reasonable outflow, particularly to the south of the system. So what happens is when those cloud tops get really high, the top of those clouds needs to escape, and we can start to see there's an escape channel here for them. Because if they don't escape, what it does is it chokes off the potential for further or new convective activity. So therefore, we've got that channel developing here to the south. We can see it attached to a trough system through the southern Coral Sea. So that's always a good sign as well. You can see just generally a weak rotation developing. It does seem to be a very broad system though at the moment, so there doesn't seem to be a very tight circulation center at the surface, at least just yet. The Joint Typhoon Warning Centre has upgraded the system to a medium chance of developing into a tropical cyclone in the next 24 hours, but interestingly enough, we see that they also pick up the fact that the convection is broken, it is deep, but it's also along the outer peripheries of an elongated low-level circulation center. So the circulation at the surface is not tight enough for it to form into a tropical cyclone very quickly. So it's going to take a little bit of time to tighten up the circulation, and then we start to talk about cyclone potential. So it's not all going to happen all at once. There's generally a fairly defined period where that low-level circulation tightens up before we can start to look at it for tropical cyclone development. But can we just say it's located in almost perfect conditions for further development into a cyclone? It's a very favourable environment. It's under a ridge. It's got good outflow, and I showed you the outflow on the satellite image. No vertical wind shear. There's very little vertical wind shear, and sea surface temperatures are about 28 to 30 degrees in the area. Really, there's nothing holding this back now. The only thing it needs to do is tighten its circulation up. Once it does that, should be all systems go. It's a really good image here as the satellite-derived wind products to show you that how elongated and really weak the actual circulation at the surface is at the moment. We've got 15 to 20 knot winds on the southeastern semicircle or southeastern quadrant, and if we look further to the north up here, the winds are very, very light. There's almost a lack of circulation here, so it's almost like it's a trough type feature. So until this tightens up right around this central area, we're not going to see this potentially form into a cyclone until that happens. So at this stage, models suggest it's going to remain pretty loose for another 12 to 18 hours before it tightens up, and therefore the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia or in Queensland have only given this system a moderate potential of forming into a cyclone tomorrow, but then that potential increases quite a fair bit, or dramatically in fact, on Wednesday and Thursday as the circulation tightens up. So, where is it going to go? And the saga continues, and the saga is a very long one with this system because it changes, and it's a nightmare to try and predict at the moment. But as we say every night so far, guidance is starting to come together. What happens in the morning is guidance splits, and then by night time again, guidance comes together. So tonight, the guidance showing a landfall slightly to the north of where we were showing last night. So last night we were talking about a landfall anywhere from, I guess we were talking anywhere from Cairns to Mackay, but most of the reliable modelling had the system crossing sort of between Townsville and Mackay. With the outliers around Cairns. Well, it seems now that the outliers are the Townsville to Mackay region, and the general consensus is the Cairns to Townsville region. So once again, it does chop and change, but we can at least highlight the fact that that Cairns to Mackay coastline is certainly the favoured region for the crossing of this system. At this point in time, we're looking at approximately a 985 to 995 hectopascal system, but just be aware that the models may not be picking up the fact that this is lying under a ridge in very low wind shear conditions. The further north that it tracks, it will run out of time to form into anything significant. If it decides to take a more southerly track, though, in that Townsville to Mackay region, there is a chance there that it might form into a more significant Category 2 type tropical cyclone, as opposed to the current guidance which keeps it at Category 1 or low-end Category 2 upon landfall further to the north. It is, according to the GFS model, going to continue to move in a southwest to west-southwest direction all through inland parts of Queensland, which would be fantastic news for the farmers. But unfortunately, that particular guidance isn't shared by all the global models. So this is sort of going out on a limb here by pushing it into central western Queensland. I mean, that would be an ideal scenario, surely, for everyone. Not too much damage on the coast, Category 1 type system, and then a lot of rainfall inland would be an absolutely amazing scenario. But we're not ready to take that one to the bank yet, not by any stretch of the imagination. But anyway, here's the low. Here's the low. It's going to track in a west to southwest direction all through to landfall, and that's all she wrote according to the GFS. Just got a feeling it might be a little bit more complicated than that, but hopefully the models are aligning, and hopefully this type of scenario pans out for everyone. The Access R model from the Bureau of Meteorology puts this system on landfall around about Wednesday afternoon to Wednesday night, just to the north of Cairns, around the Mossman, Port Douglas to Cooktown region, in fact. And we see heavy rainfall expected anywhere to the south of that system, all the way down to around Townsville, with more feeder bands around the Mackay or Proserpine region as well. So look, if it remains a fairly broad and monsoonal type low pressure system, it is expected to adopt a fairly well northerly track here. However, if it becomes a bit of a deeper tropical cyclone type system, then it is likely to push in a more southwesterly direction as opposed to a directly due west motion, which is shown here on the Access R model. So while the Access R track is not completely off its head, it is a little bit too far north for our liking in terms of what we would expect to happen. The NavGem model continues to keep this a very, very weak tropical low and pushes it directly onto the coast around Princess Charlotte Bay and very, very quickly around Wednesday morning. So we think this scenario is completely out of the question at this point in time. Looking at our number 2 model in the world, the UK Met model, we can see that right now the system, or the weak low, is located way out here in the northern Coral Sea. And if we track it through to Monday night and then into Tuesday morning, we see that it remains a fairly broad tropical low here as it tracks in a westerly to west-southwest direction. Now, interestingly though, as we head to Tuesday night, while it remains weak, by Wednesday morning it shows signs of intensification. And the reason being at that point in time, around about Wednesday, is it has a slight interaction with an upper level trough well to the southeast of it. And that upper level trough enhances some outflow to the southeastern quadrant. And so what we end up seeing is it actually enhances the potential for this to form quickly on the Wednesday and intensify reasonably rapidly on the Wednesday and start to actually look like a tropical cyclone on Wednesday as we head to 10 a.m. And then as we head toward Wednesday night, we see the system continuing. So the upper trough doesn't actually capture it. So the upper trough doesn't actually push it in a southeast direction, which is what the upper troughs tend to try and do. And what we then have is a mid-level ridge just in here through southern Australia, which will guide it basically in a west to west southwest to even southwest direction. Alright, so it is still touch and go a little bit on Wednesday, and some of the guidances and the ensembles do have the upper trough capturing the system slightly and pushing it in a southeast direction for a little bit before the ridge takes hold again and pushes it southwest. So once again, as we've been saying for the last couple of days, Wednesday is a very significant day for this system, because if the upper trough doesn't quite take it, it will push west and barrel into the coast up here between Cairns and Townsville, particularly closer to the Cairns to Tully area. If the upper trough does decide to just capture it a little, it will push more in a south to southeast direction just for about a day or so, and then pummel the coast more in the Herbert and Lower Burdick and Central Coast with Sunday's region. So Wednesday is still the key day in this particular cyclone's life cycle in terms of where it's going to hit. And then as we head to Thursday morning, we see that the system is close to making landfall to the east or just southeast of Cairns, heading towards the Innisfail to Tully region for its landfall location on the UK Met model. And obviously with any of these models, the most of the rain will be located to the south of the low. So you can see here some very heavy rainfalls located anywhere sort of from about Townsville or even Ayr northwards through to the centre of the system. Here's a computer model we don't often show you. This is the Russian computer model, and it comes from the Hydrometeorology Center of Russia. And here it is 24 hours. It shows pretty similar to the other models, so we might start taking a look at this one and see how it goes in terms of accuracy. But this is 24 hours time. We see the weak low out here. 48 hours time, we see it tightening up as it heads in a westerly direction towards the Cairns region. In 60 hours time, we see it basically just to the east of Cairns. 72 hours time, it gets right up close and personal with the North Queensland coast, almost does a bit of a stall, and then 84 hours time it goes inland right around the Cairns area. So just that one's quite interesting. We don't normally use it, so we'll keep track and see how it goes with this particular system. Alright, as we look to our most accurate global model, the European, and we check it out tomorrow morning, we have the tropical low still quite an elongated feature here. That means the centre hasn't quite tightened up, but we do have gale force or near gale force winds to the south and strong wind warning winds to the north. Now those winds obviously are going to create a lot of convergence, and what we should eventually see as we head towards tomorrow night, we start to see that those winds increase further both in the north and south of the system, and as we head to Wednesday morning, the system does in fact tighten up and just into a reasonably strong chance there of becoming a tropical cyclone as we head into Wednesday. Then by Wednesday night it continues to track in a west to southwest direction here and approaches the far north Queensland coast, but you can see here gales anywhere from, or near gales anywhere from about Proserpine all the way through to Cairns to the south of the actual tropical cyclone itself, possibly getting into some fairly strong gales in here just offshore and attacking or approaching the coast right around the Cairns area. Then as we head to Thursday morning or overnight, Wednesday into Thursday, we continue to see those gales hitting the coast. And as we head to Thursday, 4 a.m., we see that the system is approaching landfall there, and the system finally makes landfall at around about 10 a.m. in the morning on Thursday, right on the Cairns City region, possibly just in the northern beaches there. But look, folks, this is still a highly varied scenario. While the models, at least at the deterministic level, are showing us a very similar region of crossing, so somewhere sort of between Cooktown and Tully, we are starting to see we are still seeing a fair disagreement in the model guidance at the ensemble level. So not all of the models, or not all of the members of each model, are suggesting a similar crossing point. However, this particular track does make sense, assuming of course that the upper level trough does not try and capture the system, or does not succeed in capturing the system. The other thing I'd like to note is the wind shear values as the system approaches the coast. They're not all favourable here. As the system approaches the coast, we have some moderate shear conditions on the North Queensland and far North Queensland coast, and that may in fact inhibit further development of the system as it attracts, or as it approaches the Queensland coast. So with this amount of wind shear in the blue value, which is around the 20 knots plus mark, it's going to limit the potential for further deepening of this system. Now, be aware that wind shear forecasts can change quite dramatically, especially if this is located under what we call an upper level ridge. These shear conditions may relax, and with it we may see better conditions for further deepening on approach to the coast. But at this point in time, that doesn't look likely based on the current shear forecast. We have enough moist air here to not be an issue as the system tracks into the coastline. Remember, we need moist air in the mid-levels of the atmosphere to sustain a tropical cyclone. We have that all through North Queensland. Don't worry too much about this dry air to the south of about Mackay southwards. This dry air is not going to penetrate northwards far enough to impact the tropical cyclone on its approach to the Queensland coast. So this is D-Day, this is Wednesday, and this is the ensemble from the European. Now we can see that overall the European expects the low to be located in that region, but we do have certainly some model variance there, where some of the model guidance even puts the low very close to, if not onshore, by Wednesday, which seems very sudden. And some of the other guidance keeps the low well offshore on Wednesday. Now, so that is something we will need to look at as to how this system reacts with that momentary period where the upper level trough attempts to have some impact on the circulation. So here it is on Wednesday. Here's our upper level trough. Here's our upper level ridge, and here's our low or cyclone at that point in time. And so what we're seeing is some of the guidance wants to develop this upper level trough further to the north, and with it momentarily, not quite develop it far enough to actually capture the system and push it out here towards New Zealand, but momentarily stop the system's westward progression and move it in a more southerly direction before the ridge takes hold again and pushes it back to the west. And that's why we're still seeing some guidance suggesting a Townsville to Mackay crossing as opposed to a done deal with a Cairns crossing or a Cairns to Townsville crossing. So there is still some variability there, even though you're not seeing it on the deterministic charts. So the situation shown by the European is certainly one that is going to be great news for everyone in terms of rain, because it's going to be a weak cyclone, not strong enough to cause any major damage, but it's going to be a cyclone that's going to create a lot of rain for a lot of parts of the coastline. Now, as we head towards Tuesday afternoon to Tuesday night, we see that most of the rainfall located right around that wet tropics coastline. As we head to Wednesday morning, we see that rainfall spreading all through the central and north tropical coast, as well as the Townsville coastline as well. As we head to Wednesday afternoon, we continue to see that rainfall really spreading out all over the place here. Wednesday night, we start to see some heavy falls approaching the coastline directly to the southwest of where the low is, or the cyclone is tracking. As we head to Thursday morning, or overnight Wednesday into Thursday, some really heavy rain pushing as far south as about Bowen on there. And as we head to Thursday morning, once it makes landfall, we see even heavier rain heading towards the Bowen to Ingham or Innisfail area. So possibly looking at over 100 millimetres in those places over the 24-hour period. And look, it's pretty slow moving at that stage, and so we're going to see continued rainfall along this coastal fringe and extending a fair way inland if this track is adopted as we head towards Friday Friday morning, we're continuing to see this part of the coastline along the tropical coast getting pummeled with rain. So you could see falls here of up to 200 millimetres over the 24 hours, assuming that the system takes this type of track. So it is it could quite become a very big rain producer for most of northern Queensland, and then possibly once it gets inland, we'll start to see some feeder banding coming through the Mackay region, and we might start to see some very heavy rain on that central coast and Whitsundays area. So ideally, this would be a great situation for our pastoralists in northern and central inland Queensland, as well as the coastal regions of Queensland, anywhere from about Mackay northwards or Serena northwards. So ideally, this is what we would like to happen. However, there is still a lot of variability in the guidance. Not as much as the last few days, but there is still enough there for us to cast doubt on this particular track forecast. Alright folks, thanks for watching tonight. We will have another update on the 28th of January 2014. On the 28th, we're going to discuss a big issue that could arise out of this tropical cyclone, and that is the king tide threat. We have some of the highest tides in the year, and we'll go through where those tides are, and we'll also start to have maybe a better idea at approximate time of impact of this system, and we can then hone in and have a look at where the winds are coming from at the particular high tide times at particular locations on the coastline, and tell you what sort of threat you might be facing there with the high tides. Alright, thanks for watching tonight. That's something for another night though, because we just don't know yet. We don't have the guidance clear enough yet to talk about that in more detail. We'll talk again tomorrow night. Good night.